Hey fearsome friends, I have someone joining me tonight, a channel called Horror Over Coffee, and I want you to give him a warm welcome. The link to his channel will be in the description, so if you like what you hear, go check him out. So without further ado, here are 12 truly scary horror stories for you. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. In my late teens and early 20s, I was friends with a girl named Lucy. She was a very lonely kind of girl, whose parents were, well, honestly, really horrible. Her mother was verbally abusive, and her father really couldn't care less about anything. So because of the lack of love in her life, Lucy searched through dating sites for love and comfort from strange men, and was not afraid of meeting them face to face, even if she'd only been chatting to them for a few days. Now, my friendship with Lucy was a strange one. I found her quite annoying at times, but I also felt bad for her because of her loneliness and lack of friends and love in her life. Sometimes I really didn't want to hang out with her, and some days I would. When it was just her and I together, she was normal and okay to be around, and would be very appreciative of having someone give her attention. We had a small group of friends, and she would try to get all of us together as often as possible. And honestly, the whole group together was really quite fun. Being all together, Lucy would be hyper, and you could tell she was just happy to be around people who didn't insult her as her mother did. During one of these times, she suddenly told us she had a boyfriend. We were all surprised, because we knew how she'd met a lot of guys online, but we had never heard her say she was actually dating someone. A few days later, she set up a day for our friend group to meet him. Trevor. None of us were looking forward to it though, because we thought he was going to be like all the others, a temporary boy toy. When we did finally meet him, we all felt awkward as he barely spoke a word. He wouldn't look directly at any of us at all, and Lucy would try to be funny, but he would just give her dirty looks. So needless to say, we thought he was a weird one, and could tell he didn't care much for her. As the days went on, Lucy kept telling me how much Trevor didn't like me, which I found particularly weird, as not to sound big-headed, no one ever disliked me. I'm always polite and respectful, and I smile a lot at everyone, but for some reason, he just did not like me. She kept saying that he thought I was using Lucy for her money, but I'm not sure how he came to that conclusion, since I paid for everything for her. But to keep this piece of the story short, I think he was trying to find reasons to convince her to get rid of me, and I of course got a horrible vibe from him. He dressed like he didn't care about life. He never smiled. He didn't shake hands when first meeting us. He stank of weed, and we all really just had an overall uncomfortable feeling about him. After months of Trevor trying to convince Lucy that I was a terrible friend and should not hang out with me anymore, she eventually started to do as she was told. She would start to hide me from him. If she and I were together and he would call her on her phone, she would lie and say I wasn't there. If she was with our group of friends, he would have her swear I wasn't there, and when he was going to be joining the group on an outing, or just hanging out at her place, she would tell me I couldn't come. Lucy will do whatever a boyfriend says, just to keep pleasing them so she doesn't lose them. Now here's where it gets scary. It began when Lucy called me one day and said she wanted me to come and hang out at her place. I agreed, and she came to pick me up. We went to our house and watched TV for a bit. Then we decided that it was a nice day outside, so we would take her 2 dogs for a walk to a nearby pocket park, then go back to hers for lunch. While at this park, she received a phone call. Now at this point, let me say that Lucy is not a private person whatsoever, and has never ever walked away to answer a phone call. Until this day, however. She walked far enough away that she knew I wouldn't be able to hear anything she was saying, and this was suspicious to me, but not enough to question it. Then the call ended and she walked back over towards me, with a look on her face as if she was trying not to smile. Then she said, "So I need to bring you home now." I was slightly confused as we had only been together for around an hour. We usually spend the entire day together. And she would never want me to go home. She would even frequently beg me to sleep over to avoid being alone. But whatever. I said okay, and we walked to drop off her dogs at home. Then we got in her car and off we went. About 10 minutes into the car ride, I realized she wasn't going in the direction of my house. So I asked her, "Where are we going?" She smirked but didn't respond. So I asked again, laughing uncomfortably. "Seriously, where are we going?" She continued to smirk but didn't want to answer me, and I realized then that she was heading in the direction of where her boyfriend lived. Oh, hell no. I asked one last time with anger in my voice, "Where are you taking me?" And her only response was bone-chilling. "Trevor wants to talk to you." Nope. No. I wasn't having any of it. I insisted and demanded that she let me out of the car, but with her evil smirk and same response, she said it again. "It's okay, he just wants to talk to you." I was furious at this point, because this creepy guy who looks like he wants to kill someone, and also despised me, wanted to talk to me. Why can't he talk to me on the phone? Why do I need to go to his sketchy apartment? She absolutely refused to let me out of the car, and she had the doors locked, as if I wasn't able to unlock my passenger door. So I waited until she reached a red light. I grabbed her wallet from the back seat and took out her bus pass, then bolted out of the car having no idea where I was or where the nearest bus stop was. But I didn't care at that point. I was not about to let her crazy-ass boyfriend do whatever he wanted with me. She yelled for me to get back into the car, but of course I ignored her. Then she sped off furiously, and I immediately blocked her number on my phone, removed her as my friend on social media, and immediately warned the group of friends not to talk to her because she'd gone nuts. I haven't spoken to her since that day, and she also lost the other 5 friends of the group as well. Lucy, I hope you're truly lonely now.
This happened a few weeks ago. I work at a petrol station. I have years of experience in a previous one, so getting this job was just a piece of cake, I guess. Only, this was different. It's lone working. Can you imagine 8 hours entirely by yourself, especially doing late shifts? So, my shift started early afternoon. About maybe half an hour into my shift, this guy walks in. I seen him before as he entered the shop the day before, and randomly asked me if I had any shopping bags to spare. The guy was giving me some uncomfortable vibes, but luckily someone else was working with me that day for a short while, so I asked them to deal with that guy. My colleague said we don't have anything to spare, and told him bye. The guy leaves. Anyway, back to this very day. The guy walks in and I thought to myself, what in the world could he want now? Another handout? And of course, he just walks up to the desk and starts chatting to me. He was asking me some advice about his living situation, as he told me he used to be homeless. Since to me it's not really my place to give advice, plus I just didn't really want to be stuck talking to this guy, I just shrugged and told him to sleep on it, and then have a think about things. Of course, he left. He didn't enter the store to buy anything at all, just chat. But thinking back, I remembered him asking me what time I got off, and stupidly I told him, 11 o'clock tonight. I got on with my shift as usual, up until 9:30 p.m. He returns, but with another guy who, may I say, looked dodgy, all dressed in black with his hood up. The guy who entered the shop previously pokes his head into the door and asked if I do phone top-ups. We do, but something in my gut was telling me, make him leave now. So I lied and told him we don't. So the guy and his dodgy friend hung outside the store for a bit while I served other customers until the shop seemed quiet. Again, they both entered the store and they started looking around the shop. I noticed the dodgy guy kept his hands in his pockets the whole time. And then the thought struck me, oh no, I'm getting robbed tonight. so I took some deep breaths and tried to calm down and just thought of my training. I repeated in my head, just comply, give them what they want, and then call the police after they leave. But of course, from the panic, I thought to myself a better plan. So I stood ready with one hand under the desk, hovering over the panic button. I thought to myself, the minute they pull a weapon on me, hit the button, show hands, comply, and hope the police arrive on time to catch them. Well, they just ended up buying a bottle of water, and of course, I did notice there was someone still outside in their car. I felt a huge sigh of relief, thinking they just wanted water. Or they decided not to rob me because there's another person outside. They both leave the store, but again, hang around outside, right by the door. Then I see the car drive away and thought to myself, I don't want these guys in the store again, not while I'm completely alone. So I flip the switch that automatically locks the main door. Half an hour passes, I had no customers, and still, the two guys are hanging around outside. I call my boss to tell him what's going on and to give him a heads up that at some point I'm going to have to call the police to have them move the two men along, and it's making me very anxious. Then another guy shows up and joins the guys all dressed in black, wearing those COVID masks. He hands his friends masks as well, and then makes his way around the back of the store. Then I realized, oh no, the back door, the one I go out from to puff on my vape. I ran to the back door, slammed it shut, and locked it. At this point, I was scared for my life. These guys had stacked around the place for which felt like an hour and a half. I hid in the office, watching the cameras. I picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the police. At this point, I was really freaking out, but I had to listen carefully while I was on the phone because I was going through those "press 1 for this" prompts and I couldn't focus on the next thing. Then a colleague calls me on my cell phone to check in on me. I told him what was happening, then I came out the office to take a peek, and of course, those guys were right up to the window, knocking to grab my attention. And yes, they saw me with two phones to my ears. Oh no, they saw me, I said to my colleague on the phone. Then I came up with an idea. I put the phone I had making a call to the police down, and I kept my colleague on the other phone. I said, listen, I'm going to see what they want. Stay on the phone. I'm going to put you on speaker. Stay quiet. Don't say a word. Just listen. If you hear me say, the till is slow, you hang up and call the police. 999, okay? I mean it. That's me telling you I'm in danger. So I put him on speaker and hid my phone in my bra. I head to the window. What's up, guys? Can I help you? Why is the door locked? That's because we're in night mode now. Doors are locked, but I can serve through the hatch. What can I get you? They just look at each other and whisper amongst themselves. We'll just take a pack of smokes and a lighter. Sure, one moment. I grab what they ask for, and they push a 20 through. I quickly grab the 20, and of course check it. Then I rang them up, but as I had their change ready, I saw one hand through the hatch. I dropped their change into that hand, avoiding contact. Okay, thank you, bye now. I stare them down. They finally leave for good. As soon as they were gone, I fell to the floor and burst out crying after holding in that fear for so long. I demanded that I be changed to morning shifts after that night, or I'm quitting.
So this happened back in 2011, and something I will never forget. Also, AIM was still pretty active during that time, so was video chatting. Think Tiny Chat. And this is important for later. I was on an online dating site and was talking to this guy. I was 31 at the time and he was 28, and we'd been talking for about 6 weeks before I gave him my phone number, where we took it offline to calling and texting for another couple of weeks. 2 months after our initial chat, we were texting, and he told me that he was out having a few beers at a bar near my house. He asked what I was doing and asked if I wanted to come out, but I'd had a very long day at work and didn't feel like going to a bar. I'm also not a big drinker, so I invited him over to my place instead, I know. And he accepted. I figured I would be okay since I do keep firearms for protection and know how to defend myself, and I also had a webcam. So I took a shower so I wouldn't smell like a water buffalo on a hot day. The air had gone out at work. Then I put on some makeup and got dressed. I waited for a little while until he called to say he was outside my house. I clicked record on my computer's webcam program and turned off my monitor and went to let him in. It was around 10 p.m. by this point, and once he was in, we went to my bedroom to hang out because my living room was being remodeled. So we were sitting on the bed and chatted for about an hour, talking about anything and everything. The conversation flowed really well, and he was really handsome, and I was very comfortable with him. We got onto the subject of firearms, and I showed him mine, when about 15 minutes later, he asked for some water. I went to the kitchen to get him a bottle, and when I came back, he said he'd gotten a phone call and had to leave. And after he'd gone, I looked on my nightstand, which is where I put the firearm down after showing him, and it was gone. I looked everywhere for it, thinking I'd put it down somewhere else. But no, it had vanished. I played back the recording from my webcam then, and sure enough, he'd grabbed it and put it in his hoodie. I was terrified at that point, as now he knew where I lived, and he had my gun, and he'd left his phone on my bed. It rang then, so I answered it, and I came to find out that he's married. His wife was calling him wondering where he was, so I told her everything, including the fact that he'd stolen my firearm, and I had video evidence to prove it. I was going to call the police on him, but the next thing I knew, he was banging on my door, my gun in his hand, and was asking me for his phone. "I need my phone. Give me my phone," he shouted through the door. I didn't open the door, but yelled through the window and said, "Take the clip out of my gun, empty the chamber, throw the clip into the bushes, the one across the road, and put it on the ground." "No, give me my phone," he insisted. "I'm on the phone with your wife right now, and I have you on video stealing from me," I told him. I put his wife on speaker and she shouted a whole bunch of expletives through the phone at him. I could hear him now becoming uncomfortable, and he ran, got into his car, then came back to my front door. "I threw your gun in the ditch," he said. At this point I made him empty his pockets, take his pants off, take his hoodie off and show me that he didn't have my gun on him. And all the while his wife was on the phone hearing everything. I then left my place and got into his car, with me driving, and told him to take me to where he'd thrown my gun. He proceeded to tell me that I didn't know how hard it is for him being a felon, not being allowed to own his own gun because of a mistake he'd made. And the mistake, you ask? Domestic violence involving a firearm. We got up the road. He told me it was there in the ditch, but then all of a sudden I realized the situation I was in. I could get out of the car and get it, but that would leave him to do whatever he wanted to me, if he chose to. He was 6'4" and 225 pounds, and me, 5'3" and 135 pounds. Or I could make him go get it, taking the chance of him seriously hurting me. I decided to take that chance, as I was on his phone with his wife and my phone with 911 simultaneously. So he retrieved the gun, brought it back to the car, and I drove back to my house to wait for the police. I got out of the car and he got in the driver's seat, and I was still on the phone with the police. I walked around the back of his car to get his license plate number, and he put his car into reverse, hit me, then took off. The police found him later that evening, and he still had the clip and the one in the chamber in his pocket, so now he's enjoying time in prison. I'm so glad I never got to meet this person again.
This happened about 15 years ago when I was a teenager in high school. I grew up in a small town in western New York. There was so little crime in that town that it had been designated the safest town in America by a well-known national magazine for at least 10 consecutive years in my childhood. Unfortunately, that streak ended when a man was shot and killed in his own home, with his son standing right next to him. They caught the guy, but murders like that knocked us off the list. Despite that isolated and horrific event, the town continued to be extremely safe. My parents decided to adopt a dog when I was about 12. We found a very sweet boxer mixed puppy and named him Homer because my parents loved Greek mythology and we all enjoyed The Simpsons. I was given the task of walking him twice a day. The first walk happened early in the morning as I had early swim practice and then school. By the time I was 15, the morning walks happened around 5:30 a.m. I didn't love waking up that early, but I had to do it and it was generally a very peaceful time for a walk. I always brought a small flashlight with me as well to guide the way. Given that it was Western New York, by the late fall/early winter, it was still very dark outside at the time, and chilly. On this particular morning, things started off as usual. I got up, brushed my teeth, put on Homer's little dog coat and leash, then headed out the front door. Closing it behind me, I stopped for a moment on the front porch and switched on the flashlight. Something caught my eye. I looked to my left, jumped about a foot, and let out a soft, garbled scream. I don't know why it wasn't a regular scream. It seemed to get stuck in my throat. Sitting immediately to my left on the porch chair was a dead man. At least, I assumed he was dead. His eyes were closed and he wasn't moving. I grabbed Homer, who had started sniffing the guy, yanked the front door back open, ran inside and slammed it shut, then flipped the deadbolt immediately. I stood on my tiptoes to look out the small window at the top of the door, and sure enough, the man was still there, not moving, not a figment of my imagination. My first instinct was to call 911, but I suddenly stopped. How was I going to explain a dead guy on my porch to the cops? Obviously, I hadn't killed him, and my parents had never even been arrested to the best of my knowledge, but who would believe us? In retrospect, I have to laugh at this line of reasoning, but you're not always a logical thinker in these kinds of situations. So, I decided to wake my parents up. I ran upstairs into their bedroom and pushed on my father's shoulder. "Dad, wake up! There's a guy on the porch," I frantically informed him. "I think he's dead." My dad sprang awake, grabbing the baseball bat he kept under his bed, and made his way downstairs, me following close behind him. As we moved towards the front door, my dad asked me how the dead man ended up on the porch. "I don't know," I replied. "He was just there when I went to take Homer out." My father looked out the small window onto the porch, holding out a hand to keep me from following him. He slowly opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, raising the bat. I watched from the open door, frozen, as he started to lean down towards the man. The man moved. This time I did scream, in full force. Then, as I saw the man shift again, I realized that he hadn't been dead. He was just deeply asleep. I never felt so foolish in my life. My dad came back inside and dialed 911. The police arrived quickly after, and I watched through the window in the living room as the police shook the man awake and spoke with both him and my father. When he came back inside, my father told me what had happened. The man lived on the same street as us, but quite a few houses away. Apparently, he had been out drinking and had gotten confused when going home, telling the taxi to drop him off in front of our house instead of his own. This was a little understandable, as we lived in one of those pre-planned neighborhoods where the developers used 4 or 5 house plans for the whole community. When the man got to the front door and found that his key wouldn't work, he sat down on the front porch chair and started sleeping. Given how chilly it was, I was amazed that he hadn't gotten frostbite. I never saw him in the 3 years that I lived there until I went to college. I would always look at his house when I walked past it with Homer, but I didn't linger. He never came over to apologize or explain himself either. My best guess is that he didn't even remember falling asleep on our porch, but it's something I won't ever forget.
In 2019, I had bought my sister and I tickets to see 21 Pilots in Oklahoma City, and at the time I was a 20-year-old petite woman. I'm a massive fan of their music, so made my sister pack and be ready to line up at the venue around 2 to 3 a.m. to get decent spots in the pit. And when we got there, we were greeted by other fans and had a pretty good time. I was able to park my car in a lot pretty close to the venue and got away with it until about 5 to 6 a.m. when police and venue management, I can't remember which, told us that anyone parked on that lot would be towed if not moved in the next hour. At that time, the venue management had made an actual line clear up to the door, and my sister didn't have her license at the time, and we were able to become acquainted with some of the people in line. So I felt comfortable for her to stay there whilst I found somewhere new to park. So fast forward to me finding a Sonic that was close by, and I figured I could get away with free parking. So I started the close to a mile walk back to the venue, when I found an alleyway that looked to be one of those nightlife streets that are connected to bars. Now, since it was broad daylight, and I knew I would save time going this route, I wasn't apprehensive about taking the alleyway. About halfway through it, I came across a thin man, no older than 40s, sitting at one of the bar's back patios. When he saw me, he made a joke about a pillow I was carrying. My sister had texted me to ask me to bring one back so she could take a nap before the concert. Then he asked me where I was headed. I stupidly told him I was going to the concert downtown, so he asked me if I wanted any drugs, to which I replied no. But then he asked me if he could come with me. I lied and told him it was sold out, so he couldn't. And during this entire exchange, I'd kept walking as he was talking, to hopefully shake him off and show no interest in the conversation. When I had reached the end of the alley, I had a bad feeling that I was being followed. So when I turned the corner, I quickly jogged to hopefully gain some distance between us, if that was the case. But unfortunately I was right, because I remember hearing fast footsteps following behind me, then abruptly stop when I turned round to look. It was almost like I was in a movie. He'd rushed behind something when I turned, thinking I hadn't seen him. At this point I was panicking and was trying to spot the closest store to me. It was 5:36 a.m. at this point, so anything I did pass was closed. Plus I was in a suburban area with more apartment building than stores. So I turned another corner and saw a man was coming out of his house. I hurried up to him and asked if he could help me as there was someone following me. But by this point, the scrawny man from the alley had gained on me and was only a few feet away, and he began telling the guy that I was a liar and to not listen to me. The guy coming out of his home then looked at me, then the creep, then said to me, "Sorry, I can't help you," and closed his door in my face. I have never to this day felt so utterly helpless. I turned to the creepy guy and pleaded with him to leave me alone. But he kept telling me that I wasn't going anywhere, and I wasn't going to no concert, along with a bunch of other threatening comments. But by some luck, I was able to spot a group of people in 21 Pilots merch across the street and sprinted across to start walking next to them. I quickly told them what was happening and asked if I could walk with them to the venue, and they thankfully said yes to me. I think the creepy man lost interest in me after that, and he began walking slowly back in the opposite direction. I was eventually able to make it back to the venue okay, but immediately broke down upon seeing my sister. I thanked my new acquaintances and called the cops, but was told that he does that a lot and he's not harmless. I was told by the venue's bodyguards that they would walk me to my car after the concert, but upon returning to the same spot for them to do so, they weren't there. To say I was pretty disappointed on how it was all handled is an understatement, and it still freaks me out to this day on how easily I could have been taken, or if I'd even been here to tell anyone this story.
This happened in the year 2000 or 2001. I had just moved to SoCal for college. My roommate and I, both males, early 20s, thought it would be fun to drive into Mexico because it was not that far away and we had never been. One Saturday late morning, we had made the drive into Taiwan, parked, and immediately hit a bar/restaurant. It was around 1 or 2 p.m. We ate tacos and drank a lot of beer and tequila. We got pretty faded at this place. I think we had cigars too. After a couple of hours, we exited onto the street pretty drunk and in very good spirits. It was still daylight, maybe mid-afternoon. I think our plan was to hang out a little while longer and then drive back home at dusk once we sobered up a bit. We were approached on the street by a very friendly Hispanic male. He was very short, maybe 5'2", Joe Pesci style, approximately 30s in age, and stalky. He was literally dressed like Louise from Revenge of the Nerds. White dress shirt buttoned up all the way, tucked in, trousers hiked up high, flooding socks showing, etc. He may have also had glasses on. He was very friendly and presented himself almost like a tour guide. "Hey, you guys not from around here? Let me show you the local spots," kind of presentation. My first impression was very friendly, and we disregarded him and said no thank you. I did notice that although he was dressed like a stereotypical nerd, he had some pretty hardcore tattoos on his neck. Still, I was not scared of him, just didn't care for his service. We kept walking, and we're in a busy part of town with a lot of people, so we're really not concerned about him at all, but he kept on just following us, trying to make chit-chat about what bars or clubs were best. It just seemed like he was a promoter or something. We were kind of aimlessly walking, and he began to recommend different strip joints, which we also disregarded. Slowly, it seemed like we were walking more into the outskirts of town unknowingly. I don't know how this happened, but he was always right there following us. I don't recall how, but he was finally able to get us interested in a strip joint. He pointed it out and said it was the best or something. Maybe just because he was relentless, we agreed to walk over and go in. Oddly, we couldn't get in because my roommate didn't have his ID on him when we had just been drinking without an issue. We ultimately walked away from this place, and the follower began to ask if we had any interest in drugs, and he rattled off the names of a few. This was the first time he had mentioned drugs. Like an idiot, I said I was interested in a drug he mentioned. He said, "Follow me," and then led us towards a nearby bar, which was now really on the outskirts of town. On the walk over, my roommate quietly asked me what the heck I was doing buying drugs from this guy, but we continued. I told him it was fine. We walked into this crappy 2-story bar, and he told my roommate to wait at the bar. He and I walked into the bathroom. I recall going into the bathroom stall with him, and he asked me how much drugs I wanted. I said $20 worth, which was all the money I had on me. I gave him the $20 bill, and the bathroom door opened shortly after that. Some other random guy came in and gave the tour guide a small bag of drugs, which he then gave to me. I looked at it quickly, and it seemed legit. I put it in my pocket. Well, I guess it's time to get out of here, right? Well, this guy is kind of in my way, so I make a move to pass him and say thank you. He said something like, "Hold on a second. What about the $20 you owe me?" I said I already gave it to you, and he reached into his pocket. I remember this clear as day. He pulled out a pathetic, crumpled up $1 bill and said, "Nah, you just gave me $1. I literally was crapping my pants at this time. I told him I didn't have any more money, which was true. The bathroom door opened, and my roommate walked in and began to use the urinal on the other side from us. I felt relief as he was nearby. The tour guide was telling me something about, "Does your friend have any money?" I told him I didn't know. The tour guide suggested that we go to an ATM. I agreed and told my roommate to follow us. We were now back on the street in daylight, following him to an ATM. My roommate didn't understand what was going on. I was whispering to him to give me $20, but he was saying he didn't have it. He may have suspected something weird was going on. We were getting back into a part of town with more people on the streets, which was comforting. I kept asking my roommate to just give me $20 so I can get this guy off our back. He finally gave me the $20 just as we were nearing an ATM. I turned confidently to the tour guide and gave him the $20 with a remark like, "Here's your $20, now go on." He immediately grabbed the $20 and shoved it into his pocket. He demanded more money. We began walking away from him in another direction, but towards a populated shopping area. He stuck right behind us and was saying scary things I can't remember. He seized my right wrist, where I had a watch on that cost about $150. I wrenched my arm away from him, and we kept walking away at a brisk pace, now with a lot of people around. I quickly took the watch off and put it in my cargo shorts pocket. We passed by a market with 2 Hispanic males exiting in front of us, and we passed them. The tour guide yelled to them, "Cholos," and we spoke to them briefly, and then all 3 were suddenly running at us. The Cholos pinned me to the wall of the sidewalk, and the tour guide approached and put a big ballpoint pen to my neck. It hurt. One of the Cholos began looking for the watch, and I stopped him and simply retrieved it and gave it to him. Once this happened, they fought for it, and my roommate and I ran away. I looked back over my shoulder, and they were literally fighting each other over this watch. We got back to our car, tossed the drugs, and drove back across the border, safely. I have only been back to Mexico one other time since, and that time also was jacked by federales. So, to the tour guide and Cholos, let's not meet again.
So this happened to me about 10 years ago when I was 14. It was a warm summer night in 2012, and I, a female, was walking around the city with my friends, R, a 16-year-old male, and his older cousin J, who was a 24-year-old male. We had all been neighbours for about 4 years, and our families knew each other well. So it was quite normal for us to all be hanging out together, despite the age gaps. During our walk, we decided to take a shortcut through the cemetery. It was after hours though, and I was pretty sure it was illegal for us to be in there at the time. But we weren't doing anything other than cutting through, which we would often do during the day as well. But as we were walking down the path, we saw headlights turning into the cemetery, and the boys, of course, darted away ahead of me, into the tree line. Since they'd done that, it was pitch black, but there was residual light twinkling through the branches as I made my way down into the trees. But it dropped down to a slight hill, and the light was completely lost. As I was walking along trying to be as quiet as possible, and almost blind due to my eyes not adjusting yet, I got the sinking feeling of dread. I had no idea where the boys were, as I couldn't see, and I didn't want to be caught by the police by myself. But there was something else. It was almost a chill in the air on this warm night in July. I tried to brush the uneasy feeling off, thinking it was just my nerves or being scared because the boys had taken off without me. But alarms were going off in my head, like something was very, very wrong. And apart from legal reasons, I should not be there. Just then I could make out a shape to the left of me as I was walking, and I took a couple of steps towards it, saying, "Guys, is that you?" But there was nothing, no response. So I took a few more steps forward, and I swear to God, just like in the movies, a freaking twig snapped under my foot. Now the reason I had thought it was the boys is because this shape was crouched down next to a pile of brush and was big enough to look like 2 people hunched over. I thought that that's where they would be hiding. But when the twig snapped, I stopped in my tracks, as whatever this thing was stood up and completely towered over me. I was about 5 foot at the time, and this thing was easily 2 of me stacked on top of each other. But whatever it was only 15 feet or so away from me, and I was frozen with terror. It was facing away from me at first, then its head almost swiveled around like an owl's, and I was met with an oval-shaped grey face with no nose or mouth, and it had only 2-inch black hollow eye sockets. The rest of this thing's body was pitch black against the dark trees, and the light from the path was no longer streaming through the branches. It was just me and this thing that seemed like the personification of darkness itself. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, as the woods around me, through the corners of my eyes, were seemingly getting darker. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it through my entire body, and every tiny hair on me was prickling up. I was cold, and the only thing I can remember thinking was, "This is it. I'm never going to see my family again." Suddenly, the body of this thing had followed its head and swiveled, so now I could see its long, curved arms held right up to what would be its chest. Its legs were similarly curved, almost like it wasn't standing at full height, but still slightly crouching down. Its body was almost translucent, and it looked like it was wearing some kind of hooded cloak that was see-through as well. The only thing that was 100% solid was its face, and its void-like eyes that made me feel like I was staring right into the depths of hell. Neither of us moved. We were locked in the most terrifying staring contest for what felt like forever, until eventually a strange feeling came over me. I felt like I could finally move again, and had the energy to run a 5K marathon without breaking a sweat. Then I heard a very calm but stern voice say, "Go, now, run." It's hard to explain where the voice was coming from exactly. It was in my head, but all around me at the same time. I'm getting chills as I write this now. I know the voice hadn't come from whatever this thing was in front of me, because when I heard it speak, it looked as if this horrid creature had recoiled at the sound of it. It had taken a step or two backwards and ducked its head down. I saw this as my chance, though, turned away from it and bolted down further into this tree line, no longer caring about being quiet and crashing around through the bush like an animal being chased by some predator. I could almost feel this thing right on my tail, but after running about 200 feet, I ran directly into the boys, literally crashing into them. I was obviously scared and pissed, so I asked them why the hell they'd left me like that, and they apologized. Apparently I'd been missing for almost half an hour, and they'd been searching for me. They said they'd heard weird whispering voices all around the woods whilst I was gone, like the voices were coming from everywhere around them, but right before I crashed into them, the whispering stopped. I told them about what I'd seen, and all they said was that we should get out of here. We left the cemetery very quickly, and as soon as we walked out of the gates, we all let out this sigh of relief, and never talked about that night again. Even during the day, none of us ever took that shortcut through the cemetery again. I still live in the same city, and to this day I avoid it like the plague. I won't even drive by it. This isn't my only story, but it's definitely one of the more terrifying ones that still haunts me to this day.
It's been a while since I last posted, and I'm bored, so I figured I'd post something fun. There are few places that are more active than the Mourne Mountains within our country. They are these oddly dark mountains that have influenced many of our historical events, and our culture has always spoken about the particular event that occurred between the Black Peaks and in the Hidden Lakes. Things you may be familiar with include the Celtic giants of long ago wars, the water horse, and of course, the ever-present fairies. The upper peaks, particularly Slieve Donard, are steeped in further myths that each have their own names and meaning. Slieve Donard, for instance, is known as the Great Cairn. It is a tomb for specific mythological beings and the entrance to our underworld. The mountain's name is actually not its original one. Slieve Donard was renamed in the Christianization of Ireland and took the name of Saint Donard, who was one of the followers of St. Patrick, and as far as we can tell, there has never been a time in our history where things didn't happen on the mountain. At the foot of these mountains, in the northeast, and specifically at the northern foot of the Slieve Donard, is a popular destination for hikers, walkers, and kids doing their Duke of Edinburgh training. I even went there for mine, and it's a mountain park by the name of Tullymore. It's full of wonderful historic places, ruins, and stories. However, it's also still on the Mourne Mountains, so mysterious events will occur there, with them not being well reported. The majority of the time, it's assumed to be youths messing around in the tree line due to the park's proximity to the town of Magara. However, there are things that can happen that just don't make sense. So, walking through the woods, you feel like you're being watched. You glance left, then right, then left again, not seeing anything, but you feel like you're being watched from every angle. 30 feet in front of you is a pile of logs, arranged in such a way that it resembles a deer, but it wasn't there the last time you looked right. Then, in the space of 2 seconds, it will have been assembled, and in complete silence. This is one such happening, and also a rather common one. Even my mother and I have experienced it on our walk through the park, except in our case, it was more like 60 feet away. So we weren't sure if it was a trick of the eyes or not. You decide to go off the beaten path and push through the bush. It was a beautiful, warm sunny day, but somehow, as soon as you push through, all the color fades. It's cold and there's very little light. You are now standing in a world full of grays and browns, where there isn't even any grass, and the area looks almost untouched despite being literally just off the trail. There are no sounds of animals, no birds, no insects, and the sounds from rushing water from the river that runs nearby falls to the background. You don't feel like you're alone anymore, but you also feel like you're all alone at the same time. Something inside of you is telling you to go deeper into the place, deeper and deeper until the ground starts to climb higher. It gets muddier until the bush gets thicker. You swear that you can see tracks, but they're always different. It's like this place is well traveled, like a number of things is passing through here. Wheel tracks, foot tracks, they can all be seen, but the bush is so thick and oppressive that the idea of getting anything through here seems laughable. Finally, you remember you were doing something before you came here. The realization hit you like a truck, as if, while you were here, this place was the object of your obsession, and you wonder how long you were even here for. You backtrack, and nothing looks familiar at all. You feel completely lost before coming to a bush with light twinkling from between its bushes. You push through it and step back onto the path, but not where you were before, not even on the same side of the river. You were only walking straight, and yet, somehow you crossed the river and ended up going the opposite direction. This is also rather common. There are black zones in the forest, which are believed to create mental fog at times of the year due to being contrary to all expectation and basically just shocking people into a daze. Places that are usually warm during the winter, feeling as if you are standing next to a campfire, or places usually cold in the winter, they will frequently cause you to wander away from where you were. The terrain of the park is, however, restrictive enough that there aren't many places that you can wander to, so people come back to their senses before they can get any real distance away. However, this has never been explained how people can walk across rivers or ravines without even knowing how they got there. Once more, this happened to me. It was like night and day, walking from a vibrant, colored forest into what looked like the dead of winter. Surreal. You've been a regular around the park for some time now, and one thing you've always wondered is, who is making those structures? Large, wooden buildings made of loose logs and sticks. They're big enough to fit a person in, and if you were to put something over them, they will protect from the elements perfectly. They're always tied together in the exact same way, using string or strands of grass and wood. It's probably the local scouts, or youth, or maybe even army cadets practicing their practical survival skills, and that would make perfect sense. Until you see one that makes you question how it was even built. 10 feet above the ground, every supporting log for the structure is balanced on a branch of a tree. There was no bottom to it. It's the exact same structure, but only the walls and the roof. Only a few moments before you see it, the structure breaks, falling apart and down to the earth, becoming a pile of wood. These are uncommon, but due to the nature of falling apart after being seen, there are groups that take extra early walks in the woods to witness them before anyone else can. So the end result is the vast majority of people just seeing random piles of sticks and logs around the park. Closing words. But yeah, that's the fun of Tullymore. It's an ancient place with so much mystery included, and that's without getting into what happens just behind Tullymore. I had the personal pleasure of traveling to places best not traveled to, and experiencing things best not experienced while in Duke of Ed. If I went into all of the details, I'd just be baiting, but suffice to say, it's something I might talk about in the future. It's also something that I've been looking into and researching on and off for about 10 years now. Anyhow, thanks for listening, and have a splendid day.
This is something that happened to me almost 20 years ago, when I was 23. I was writing for a popular budget travel guidebook series at the time. I mainly worked in Central and Eastern Europe. Depending on the time of year, and which issues were being updated, I could be gone for several weeks, or even several months at a time. I mainly travelled alone, and I'd run into a few problems here and there, but my experiences were predominantly positive. At the time of this story, I'd been working in the former Yugoslavia, and was on my way to the Czech Republic from Sarajevo. It's a long journey by train, so I broke it up into several overnight stops. Zagreb first, and then Budapest, making each leg around 8 hours. It was late January and bitterly cold, and there was probably a good 7 inches of snow on the ground, perhaps more in some places. I was exhausted and battling the remnants of the flu that I'd picked up in Split, and I left Zagreb in the late afternoon, expecting to reach Budapest by around 10 p.m. I bought my ticket in the travel centre at Zagreb train station, and when I boarded the car, about half the compartments were empty, but there were definitely at least some people on the train. So since it wasn't crowded, I managed to find a compartment to myself so I could spread out a bit and prepare for a long ride. The first part was smooth. I worked on some guidebook stuff and wrote in my journal, etc. However, a few hours into the ride, we passed over the Hungarian border, and things began to go awry. I heard them before I saw them. It was a group of teen boys, about 5 of them that I could see, and they were being very loud. I could hear them running through the train car, laughing and cursing, and banging on the compartment walls. They were loud and obnoxious, but it wasn't like it was the first time I'd ever been annoyed by a group of teenagers. I kept my head down and carried on working on my writing. But as time went on, they grew louder and louder as they ran from car to car, sliding the doors open with so much force that it sounded like a bomb going off every few minutes. Then the sounds just got louder, and that's when I noticed that they were standing right outside my compartment, looking in at me. I could only see 3 of them through the small window, but there were definitely more. I'd seen them earlier. I glanced up at them, frowned, and then looked away. I'd learned the best way to deal with that kind of thing was to ignore it. I didn't want to encourage their behavior, but ignoring them seemed to have the opposite effect. "Girl, girl," they hollered at me. "Come have fun." My compartment door was closed, but they proceeded to mess with me by slowly opening it, pretending they were going to come in, and then shutting it again at the last second. It went from them chanting, "Girl, girl," to a much more ominous, "We're gonna bang tonight, and you will bang us all." This was followed by a bunch of slang words for female body parts. Some of the more universal ones I had no trouble understanding. At this point I grew very nervous, and how was I to know whether they were just messing around with me or being serious? I couldn't exactly leave, as to do so would mean walking through them, and they were blocking my exit and my entrance. But then one pulled out a pocket knife. He stuck out his tongue, running the blade across it, then pointed it at me and grinned. The guy next to him made sexual hand gestures towards me and laughed, and I tried not to show my fear. But in my mind I was quickly taking stock of what items I had to take with me if I made a break for it. My lack of reaction angered the one with the knife, so he switched from licking it to using it to penetrate the circle he'd made with his thumb and forefinger. "You like?" he called out. "You die." Part of me figured that they couldn't really do anything, as there were other people in the train car. And after all, they'd hear me scream. Surely someone would come and help me, right? The conductor hadn't come through since we'd done the border crossing, so he was due as well. I figured I only had to get through the next few minutes and they'd get bored and leave. But it was at this point that I noticed the curtain on the door window, and I know it sounds crazy, but that's when I lost it. I'd left the curtain open so that people walking by could see that the compartment was occupied. But now all I could think is that if they did come in, all they'd have to do was pull the curtain and nobody walking past would see what they were doing to me. At least one of them had a knife, and they were all taller and bigger than me. I started to tear up. Would they really kill me? Would I be maimed? I was 23 years old, but a late bloomer. I also had a history of being sexually assaulted. I'd only had consensual sex for the first time a year earlier, and I actually feared rape more than death. I feared pain. My day pack was in my lap, and the only things I had in there that could serve for a weapon was a fingernail file and a butter knife. So I reached into my bag and fumbled around until I had one in each hand. But just as they slid the door open, and the first guy stepped inside, knife pointed up my crotch. Another voice filled the corridor. I didn't need to speak the language to hear the anger, and the guys ran from my compartment, one of them dropping the knife, and I watched as a middle-aged man dressed in blue stomped after them. A few seconds later, the train came to a grinding stop, and the world outside was creepy. All I could see was snow and darkness. There were no lights in sight, and after a few seconds, the train started back again, and the boys didn't return. I was starting to feel some relief then, as the man in blue returned to my compartment. He was the conductor. "English?" he asked, and I nodded. "I made them leave. They're gone now." I thanked him, and he came into my compartment and sat down across from me. It felt good having another adult, a male, in there with me, especially an official one. I felt a lot safer. "It's okay," he said again. "Gone." "Thank you," I replied again. I was scared. He nodded knowingly and then leaned back into the seat. "It happens," he said. "Sometimes we get this. They can't hurt." I honestly felt like I was going to pass out from emotional exhaustion. But just as I was starting to let my guard down, the conductor leaned forward again and said, "You need fee." "Oh," I said. I produced my ticket and showed him. "Here's my ticket to Budapest." He looked at it, shrugged, and handed it back to me. "This is a ticket, yes, but there's a fee for Hungary. You didn't pay." This was the second time I'd made that route, and I'd never had to produce anything extra on the train itself. Now I started feeling sick to my stomach. "How much?" I asked. I had very little cash, as I was planning on getting money from the ATM in Budapest. He quoted me a number that was around $50, which was $10 more than what I paid for the actual ticket. I knew he was taking advantage of me, and I wanted to argue. But then he said, "If you don't pay, then you have to leave now." We were literally rolling through the blackest night I'd ever seen. The snow looked like it would come up to my knees. I didn't want to be dumped in the Hungarian countryside like the boys who were harassing me, so I felt like I didn't have a choice. "I don't have any Hungarian money," I said. "I've been in Croatia and Bosnia." He shrugged. "I will take." He waited while I rooted around in my backpack and produced $30 in a combination of Czech, Bosnian, Croatian, and Slovenian bills. I left myself $20. "I don't have enough," I said. He shrugged again. "It's okay, I'll take." And with that he took the wad of cash and stuffed it into his pocket, then left. Once he was gone, I gathered my day pack and headed to the bathroom. I had to pass by the other compartments as I walked down the corridor, and it was at that moment I realized I'd been wrong. There were not other riders in the other compartments. They'd all left at some point, and I was the only person in my car. If the guys had come in and attacked me, then nobody would have heard me scream, and I'd have been completely on my own. I cried for a solid 5 minutes into the tiny bathroom, and then threw up in the metal sink. I never wanted to meet those guys or anyone like them again, and I could do without meeting the conductor as well.
Hi, my sister, mom, and I have been trying to make sense of this for the past couple of hours, and the facts get less comforting the more we compare our experiences of that night. So, last Friday night, I, a 17-year-old male was home alone while my family stayed in their cabin a few kilometers away. I'm used to staying home alone, as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially while I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, and got used to the old creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night, and most noises can be attributed to him, and if anything were to happen, he would act as a guard dog of sorts and alert me to anything odd. At the same time, however, he is the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the door or windows, so I'm used to hearing him bark or growl at night. Even so, this past Friday, the sound of his barks at nearly 12 a.m. were disconcerting, to say the least. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I'm still terrified of the premise of a break-in or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. I let him bark for a few seconds, telling myself it was just something walking past our glass door in the adjacent alleyway, and he would quiet down once they pass. Needless to say, that's not what happened. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed and walked upstairs to check it out. As I suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and I saw the door open, about 2 or 3 inches. I froze. I had let Bosco out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I have never left this door open. I am a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and the like, so I would never, home alone, forget to close the door. I am 100% certain. But at the time, I didn't let myself think about these facts or even acknowledge that I could not have left the door open because I knew it would send me into a spiral, possibly even an anxiety or panic attack if I didn't explain it this way. I closed and locked the door, double-checked that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots just to put my mind at ease. And upon finding nothing, I went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there, trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walks around for about 10 minutes before I put my earphones in and talk myself down until I can fall asleep. At 2 a.m. that same night, my sister comes home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement, whining at my bedroom door. When I got up to let him out, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door. Then we let him back in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs, and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door because I was busy with work for the next few days, and forgot to mention it to anyone until tonight. My sister and mom were home with me for a movie night, while my dad and brothers stayed at the cabin. I remembered the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up, saying that, the same night, an hour or so after they had got home, the door was open again, the same door that was locked from the inside, and not opened since earlier that night. My stomach dropped, and I started shaking the second this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away. Maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it, until we both recalled that we had used the front door. Then, we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in to not steal anything, and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked someone in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of our house. Then, this hypothetical person would be trapped up there, now knowing that this house was not empty, and that there was a dog who would bark if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly to when they had found the door opened once more, much wider than when I had found it, as though they were only in a hurry on the way out. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the door frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I know it's unlikely, especially with nothing missing, but in this small town, there have been many reports of break-ins with nothing missing, vandalizing, or just breaking and entering many times, so it's not as unlikely as it may be in a bigger city. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of someone being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. I certainly am glad that my searching came up empty that night, and I did not meet this person face to face.
My boyfriend, a 23-year-old male, and I, a 23-year-old female, recently decided that we wanted to take the new tent we'd bought on its first trip. The tent was one of those that hooks onto your car to provide more storage space, and we were excited to try it out. We had planned a kayaking trip the next day at a kayak rental shop, and it was supposed to be a nice, inexpensive, outdoorsy weekend getaway. We tend to book things last minute, so all the state parks and professional campgrounds were full, but this led us to a website that is essentially an Airbnb for campsites, and the place we chose was a 100-acre property that was just 20 minutes south of the kayak shop. Of all the sites in the area, it was described as having working bathrooms, showers, it allowed for campfires, and all the sites were car accessible, which is important for a car-dependent tent. The site was also the most reviewed in the area, with 3 5 out of 5-star reviews. The area was very rural, so we didn't think much about the low number of reviews for any of the campsites, and the renter was Mary, who only ever texted us updates, but seemed sweet. So we began our 2-hour drive a bit later than anticipated, which put us behind the 11 a.m. time we'd originally informed the host, and we tried to keep her updated with the new schedule, but she just told us to let her know when we'd arrived at the address she'd sent us. We finally got there and were greeted with the barn that we'd seen in the pictures online. It had string lights all over it, seemed fairly new, and just had a nice feel to it. We sat in the car for a minute then, struggling with our cell service to text the host to let her know we had arrived, when 10 minutes after our text sent, a sweaty man who appeared to be in his 60s pulled up in an ATV. He let us know he was Mary's father-in-law, that she was busy taking care of the seasonal harvest, and that she'd sent him instead. He let us know we could take the car anywhere on the property, and offered to show us around in his ATV. Now my boyfriend, who was visibly uncomfortable, declined the offer and asked a few more questions about the woods, and how far into them we were allowed to take the car. He said again that we could go anywhere as there were no designated campsites, and the guy even offered to help pull our car out if we were to get stuck. We asked one final question about cell service, and he joked that if we were from around here we would understand that reception works better on one side of the barn than the other. Now I am from around here, and thought it was funny, but once he'd said it I realized then that he didn't have any ounce of an accent for here like he should. Eventually he left us and we began exploring the property on foot. The barn was nice and well maintained, and it was fully lit in the middle of the day, with the string lights decorating the interior too. It was insulated and had a working kitchen, but the only warning we got was to not drink the water. We walked past a shed that was out behind the barn to get to the trails that ran through the woods, and after going on a hike that my car would never have survived, we decided it might be best just to camp by a small creek. We chose a spot on the side opposite the barn, so we were still within walking distance, but we used my car as a buffer to feel a bit more isolated. Once our camp was set up, we went into the main town to get something to eat and walked around a bit. We also messaged Mary about the fire policy, and she told us that they would deliver a fire ring to the barn for us so we could take it to our camp. We arrived back at the barn about an hour and a half before it got dark, and as we drove by the barn, we noticed the lights had been turned off. We assumed it was on a timer as to not waste energy or money, and we also noticed the fire ring had not yet been delivered. So we began the grueling 30-minute setup in the sticky heat and rewarded ourselves by sitting in the air-conditioned car. It looked like it was about to rain, so my boyfriend and I pulled out a card game and waited for it to pass. It only lasted about 10 minutes, but now the sun was beginning to set. The tent held up nicely, so we felt okay leaving it for a second as we needed to use the bathroom that was towards the barn. As we crossed the creek, however, we heard what sounded to be like someone in the shed moving things around. It was a bit unsettling, but I said to my boyfriend that maybe they'd used equipment today, and what we heard was it just sitting in there making the cracking, cooling off noise that it sometimes makes. So we made it to the barn and the lights were still off, but the fire ring was there now, and it wasn't just the lights outside. None of the light switches would work. We assumed the power had been cut, as again maybe it was just on a timer, so no worries. Then we left the barn, and once we were about 10 feet away, we could hear a humming in the distance to the opposite side of the shed. The power to the barn had been restored. We changed our direction then and went to use the bathroom. But as soon as we got inside, the power cut again. I began to get a weird feeling at that point, and I could tell my boyfriend was getting it too. I looked at him and said, "Maybe they're watching us." Then I immediately followed it up with, "No, that's a lot worse." On walking back outside, the lights turned on again. My boyfriend said that we needed to leave, and I had the same gut-wrenching primal fear to do the same. And as we walked away after about 10 feet, that's when the barn lights started flickering. We briskly made our way back to the car, and being from Appalachia, I knew better than to run. Our camp that we'd set up in 30 minutes was torn down and packed up in 5. Then we jumped in the car and locked it. I managed to get the car going, being thankful that the rain hadn't caused it to stick, and we started towards the driveway. However, just as we'd made it to the road, my boyfriend looked back, and that's when we saw a man standing by the shed watching us. As soon as we pulled off onto the road, we got a text from Mary letting us know the fire ring was out by the barn for us, and she'd also informed us that we were welcome to stay in the barn if the rain had messed up our camping experience. Instead, though, we went to a nice hotel, willing to just splurge for safety, and by then it was 10 p.m. at the earliest. A sweet older lady checked us in, and desperate for validation, and just comfort from anyone, we told her what had just happened at the campsite. She looked shocked and asked if we had seen the news lately, to which we both responded that we hadn't. She went on to tell us then that couples in the state have been going missing, and all of them whilst camping. 3 couples were missing, and one was recently found on the side of the freeway, slashed to near death, and they are, at time of posting, still recovering in the hospital. We couldn't find many articles about where in the state this took place, but the look on the lady's face suggested it had been near us. We got to our room and texted Mary to tell her we weren't staying anymore, and she replied, "Thank you for staying with us." Then we locked the door and I broke down in tears. I will never forget that feeling I got in that barn. The primal fight or flight feeling, and that we were being watched. I felt it in my throat just writing this. I never want to experience that again.
I now suffer from migraines, and I sleep a lot, so I've recently been taking melatonin to keep me asleep. A lot of people have said it's what gave me these weird dreams, but I use it anyway because I'd rather have weird dreams instead of a migraine. Now, I've had many strange dreams, but the 2 I remember the most were of a girl. I only had 2 of her, and in the first one, I was at an arcade, but I kept floating towards the ceiling. I remember being really frustrated because I couldn't stop myself, but she helped pull me down. In the second dream, we were staring at each other. Her hair and clothes were soaked, and I remember Swan Lake was playing in the background, though I did fall asleep listening to it, so that part of it isn't that abnormal. A few days ago, my friends and I went to a fair in the city one night, and they wanted to go on the Ferris wheel. I was the friend that held everyone's stuff, so I stayed behind and I was looking at the lines for the other rides. I actually got goosebumps when I saw her. It was like she literally teleported from my dreams to be right in front of me. I think she was with other people because she was laughing. but I just couldn't take my eyes off her. We made eye contact briefly, then she got on a ride. My friends and I walked around for a few more hours, and I ran into her again. My friend, Kato, apparently knew one of the people she was with because he went over to them and they started talking, but I stayed back because, quite honestly, I was a little creeped out. She waved at me, so I knew she'd seen me, so I waved back. Well, kind of. I just tossed my hand up quickly. We left a little while later, and I asked Kato about the girl with the long dark hair, and he said he's really good friends with her brother. Now I know I've never met her or her brother before, or even seen pictures of them, so I really don't know how I dreamt of her. I don't know why this creeps me out so much. I think I was being dramatic when I said I was scared. Now that I think about it, it wasn't scary. It just surprised me and caught me off guard. I'm still a little spooked, but I would like to see her again.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.